When you look at the world, you'll notice something unsettling. Most people live their entire lives chasing something they never truly reach. 98% of people move through their days overwhelmed, exhausted, and convinced that life is happening to them. They repeat the same patterns, the same fears, the same doubts until those patterns become their destiny. And then there is the 2%, the ones who rise, the ones who overcome, the ones who walk with clarity even when the world around them feels confusing. But the difference between them is not luck. It's not talent, it's not intelligence. The real difference lies in what the heart holds, what the soul chooses, and what the mind decides to surrender or cling to. Because failure doesn't begin when someone falls. It begins when the heart stops trusting, when the soul forgets its purpose, and when the mind becomes chained by fear. And success, true success, begins in a quiet moment when a person finally decides to rise above the noise inside them. Today, I want you to understand that the 2% are not born different. They simply choose differently. They choose faith over fear, intention over distraction, surrender over resistance. And if you're listening right now, maybe this is your sign that you were never meant to remain in the 98. Maybe this is the moment when you rise into the 2%, not because the world said you could, but because your soul always knew you were created for more. Most people move through this world as though life is simply happening around them. They wake up because the alarm forces them. They work because survival demands it. They chase goals because society tells them this is what success looks like. But internally, they feel disconnected from their own path. They become part of the 98% without even realizing it. Not because they lack ability or intelligence, but because they have surrendered to a life that is reactive instead of intentional. They allow the world to pull them in every direction, and because they never choose where they truly want to stand, they are pushed into the crowd of those who fail long before they ever begin. To understand why this happens, you must look deeper than action. You must look at the inner world, the space where intentions are formed and decisions are shaped. This is where the quiet truth lives. Success is not built on talent, but on intention. It is not built on strength, but on discipline. It is not built on luck, but on clarity. And intention is something 98% of people rarely cultivate. A person who lives reactively wakes up and immediately becomes a passenger in their own life. They allow their emotions to dictate their choices. They allow other people's approval to determine their path. They allow fear to become louder than purpose. They allow distraction to shape their day. They allow everything external to decide everything internal. This is why they fail, not because they wanted to, but because intention was never guiding them. Their life becomes a cycle of responding, avoiding, escaping, and drifting. Even when they have desires inside their heart, those desires remain unfulfilled because desire without intention is like a seed never planted. It holds potential, but no harvest. But the small, rare group, the 2%, live differently. Their life is not reactive, it is intentional. They choose what they give their energy to. They choose who they allow near their heart. They choose what they focus on, even when the world pulls them in every direction. They choose discipline over impulses. They choose clarity over confusion. And what separates them most is that they understand this truth. Success is not something you chase, it is something you align with. And alignment begins with intention. When a person becomes intentional, they begin to see their life differently. They no longer move through their days without awareness. They no longer allow hours to pass without purpose. They no longer act from a place of emotional impulse or fear-based reaction. Instead, they become deeply aware of why they do what they do. They ask themselves questions that most people never pause long enough to ask. What is the purpose behind this action? What is the intention behind this choice? What is the direction of this step? What is the truth guiding this moment? And as they ask these questions, something powerful happens. Their inner world awakens. Awakening is not dramatic, it is subtle. It begins when a person stops living for approval and starts living from purpose. It begins when they realize that the world does not determine their future, their intentions do. It begins when they stop being driven by distraction and start being driven by meaning. And from that moment, every action they take begins to carry weight, value, and direction. The 98% struggle because they allow their mind to be filled with noise. They are constantly overwhelmed. They start something with excitement, but their motivation fades when discomfort arrives. They have dreams, but they allow fear to interrupt them. They create plans, but they allow distraction to pull them away. They want change, but they cling to the comfort of old habits. They wait for the perfect moment, not knowing that waiting is what keeps them in the 98%. The 2% understand something different. Discipline is not built on motivation, it is built on intention. Motivation comes and goes, it rises and falls. It can be strong at sunrise and gone by noon, but intention, when rooted deeply, does not fade. It becomes the anchor that holds the soul steady even when storms rise. And this anchor allows a person to keep going even when their emotions fluctuate, even when the path becomes difficult, even when progress feels slow. This is why the 2% win. Their intention sustains them when comfort disappears. Intentional living also changes how a person responds to failure. The 98% see failure as a sign to stop. They interpret difficulty as a signal that the path is not meant for them. They withdraw the moment the journey becomes uncomfortable. But the 2% see failure differently. They see it as refinement. They see it as redirection. They see it as a lesson wrapped in challenge. They understand that failure is not an ending, but a teacher. And because their intention is strong, they rise every time they fall. Most people underestimate the power of the inner world. They believe success is achieved externally through effort, hours, and action. Yes, effort matters. Yes, action matters. But effort without intention is wasted energy, and action without alignment leads to burnout. You can work endlessly and still feel stuck if your heart is not in the right place. You can chase goals for years and still feel empty if your intention is not pure. This is why the 98% feel lost. They work hard, but not with clarity. They desire change, but without anchoring themselves in meaning. The 2% win because they build their success from the inside out. They begin with clarity. Who am I becoming? What is my purpose? Why do I want this? What values do I want to embody? What habits reflect those values? They do not simply pursue a goal, they pursue the transformation required to reach that goal. And because they focus on becoming, success becomes a natural result. Successful people are not driven by external validation. They are guided by inner conviction. They do not wait for circumstances to shift. They shift themselves. They do not seek shortcuts. They embrace the journey. Another reason the 98% fail is because they are easily discouraged by comparison. They see others rising and immediately question their own worth. They measure their progress by someone else's timeline. They destroy their own motivation by comparing their beginning to someone else's middle. But the 2% protect their focus. They understand that comparison destroys intention. They know that everyone's path is different, and their job is not to imitate, but to align. When they feel doubt, they return to intention. When they feel overwhelmed, they return to intention. When they feel uncertain, they return to intention. And every time they return, they become stronger. The 98% also fail because they are disconnected from the present moment. Their mind lives in the past or the future, rarely in the now. They carry regrets that drain their energy. They carry fears about the future that rob them of peace. And because they are not grounded in the present, they cannot take consistent steps forward. The 2% live differently. They ground themselves in the present moment because they understand that this moment is the only place action can happen. Intention anchors them to now, and now becomes the doorway through which progress is made. Intentional people are also deeply aware of their environment. They understand that the people around them influence their thoughts, habits, and beliefs. The 98% surround themselves with comfort-based company, the kind of people who complain more than they grow, who fear more than they act, who escape more than they evolve. The 2% choose differently. They surround themselves with people who hold them accountable, people who push them toward growth, people whose presence strengthens their intention, not weakens it. To live with intention means to choose your thoughts instead of letting your thoughts choose you. It means to direct your day instead of letting your day direct you. It means to act from clarity instead of reacting from emotion. And when this becomes your way of living, you naturally rise into the 2%. Not because life becomes perfect, but because your inner world becomes aligned. And alignment is what transforms every step you take into a step of purpose, meaning, and direction. When a person truly grasps the power of intention, they stop asking, "Can I succeed?" and begin asking, "Who must I become to succeed?" This question alone separates the 98% from the 2%. One group chases results, the other chases transformation. One group waits for the right time, the other creates it. One group hopes for change, the other becomes the change. Intention shapes discipline, and discipline shapes destiny. The people who win are not those who feel inspired every day. They are those who act even on the days they do not feel inspired. They do not allow their emotions to dictate their progress. They rise when they are tired. They continue when they are unsure. They stay consistent when the excitement fades. And because they stay the course, they achieve what others only imagine. Your life begins to change the moment you choose to live intentionally. The moment you decide that your inner world matters more than external noise. The moment you choose purpose over pleasure, clarity over confusion, growth over comfort. The moment you decide to stop drifting and start directing your path. And if you can make that shift, if you can choose intention in every step, every action, every decision, you will no longer live among the 98%. You will rise into the 2%. Not because the journey becomes easier, but because you become aligned from within. Most people don't realize how much of their life is quietly shaped not by their dreams, but by their fears. Fear is subtle. It does not always shout. Often it whispers just enough doubt, just enough hesitation, just enough uncertainty to keep a person still when they were meant to rise. This is the story of the 98%. They follow fear without knowing they are following it. They listen to the voice of hesitation without realizing that hesitation has become their ruler. They allow comfort to speak louder than their calling. They choose security even when security is the very thing suffocating their potential. They settle for what is familiar, not because it is what they want, but because it is what feels safe. And slowly, without ever making a clear decision, they drift into a life that reflects their fears more than their dreams. Fear doesn't destroy potential in a dramatic moment. It destroys it slowly, gently, quietly. It does not break a person all at once. It breaks them with small compromises, small excuses, small moments of avoidance. One day they postpone their dream because they don't feel ready. Another day they hold back because what if they are not good enough? Another day they tell themselves they will start when they feel confident. But confidence never arrives because confidence is not born in waiting. It is born in doing. And one day turns into 1 year turns into many, and eventually they find themselves in the 98% not because they lacked the ability, but because fear convinced them that ability was never enough. The 2% choose differently. They feel fear too, but they don't obey it. They hear the same doubts, but they don't surrender to them. They feel the same hesitation, but they do not let hesitation decide their path. What separates them is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to be guided by it. The 2% choose growth, even when growth frightens them. They choose progress, even when progress feels uncomfortable. They choose responsibility, even when responsibility feels heavy. They choose to lean into the unknown, trusting that the unknown often holds what the familiar never will. Comfort is the silent trap that keeps so many from rising. Comfort feels warm, it feels safe, it feels familiar, but comfort also has a hidden cost. It has the power to keep a person exactly where they are while making them believe they are doing fine. Comfort is the place where dreams slowly wither. It is where goals dissolve. It is where years pass without meaning. It is where the 98% remain, not because they want to stay, but because breaking away requires courage they never practice. Every time they choose comfort, they strengthen the chains that hold them back. Every time they avoid discomfort, they lose a piece of the person they were meant to become. The 2% understand the truth that most people avoid. Growth is uncomfortable by design. It stretches you. It exposes your weaknesses. It challenges your patterns. It asks you to let go of who you were so you can become who you were meant to be. And this process is not soft. It is not easy. It is not familiar, but it is transformative. The 2% choose this transformation again and again, even when it feels difficult, even when it feels painful, even when it feels uncertain. They understand that comfort offers temporary peace, but growth offers lasting purpose. Distraction is another reason the 98% fail. The world is full of noise, constant, endless noise. Notifications, opinions, comparisons, expectations, entertainment. There is always something pulling the mind away from what matters. Most people live in a state of mental overload. Their thoughts are scattered. Their attention is fragmented. Their focus is weak. They begin tasks but never complete them. They set goals but rarely follow through. They want clarity but consume distractions. And because their mind is constantly pulled outward, they never look inward long enough to discover what they truly want. Distraction becomes their lifestyle, and a distracted life cannot be a purposeful one. The 2% protect their focus. They understand that focus is not something you find, it is something you build. They discipline their attention. They choose what they consume. They remove what drains their clarity. They invest their time with awareness. They prioritize what aligns with their purpose and cut away what doesn't. They understand that every distraction steals a piece of their destiny, and they refuse to hand over their future to temporary impulses. This is why they rise. Their mind is their ally, not their obstacle. People often fail because they underestimate how deeply their habits shape their life. Habits are powerful because they operate quietly. They repeat themselves without permission, without effort, without conscious awareness. And most people, without realizing it, build habits that push them into the 98%. They build habits of procrastination, habits of overthinking, habits of escaping discomfort, habits of inconsistency, habits of reacting emotionally, habits of quitting early. These habits then shape their identity, and their identity shapes their outcomes. A person who sees themselves as someone who always struggles will subconsciously create conditions that fulfill that identity. A person who sees themselves as someone who cannot stay consistent will unconsciously destroy their own consistency. This is the cycle that traps the 98%. But the 2% build habits intentionally. They understand that habits are the foundation of every breakthrough. They commit to small, steady practices even when they feel insignificant. They understand that repetition builds strength. They understand that consistency builds identity. They choose to form habits aligned with the future they want, not the past they are trying to escape. They do not rely on motivation because they know motivation is temporary. They rely on habits because habits are loyal. Habits show up even when motivation disappears. Another reason the 98% fail is because they are driven by emotion instead of purpose. They act when they feel inspired and stop when they feel tired. They move when they feel confident and freeze when they feel insecure. Their progress rises and falls based on how they feel in the moment, but feelings fluctuate. Feelings change. Feelings are not stable foundations for a meaningful life. When emotions take the lead, consistency disappears. When consistency disappears, progress becomes impossible. The 2% do not allow emotions to dictate their path. They acknowledge their emotions, but they do not surrender to them. They feel fear and still take the step. They feel doubt and still move forward. They feel tired and still keep going. They feel insecure and still act with intention. What guides them is not emotion, but commitment. And commitment is stronger than emotion. Commitment remains steady even when everything else feels unstable. This is why the 2% succeed. They do not need to feel ready to begin. They only need to be willing. The 98% fail because they wait for the perfect moment. They wait for confidence. They wait for clarity. They wait for the right timing. They wait for more support. They wait for the fear to go away. They wait for the path to become certain. But perfect moments do not exist. Confidence comes after action. Clarity comes after movement. Timing becomes right when you start. Support appears when you commit. And fear usually stays until you walk through it. Waiting becomes a prison, and many spend their whole life inside it. The 2% understand that progress begins when action begins. They move even when they don't feel ready. They choose progress over perfection. They trust that walking the path reveals the path. They understand that every small step changes their internal state. Action dissolves fear. Action builds clarity. Action strengthens identity. Action creates momentum. And momentum is what separates those who dream from those who rise. The 98% also fail because they define themselves by their past. They hold on to mistakes. They cling to regrets. They replay failures in their mind. They allow old versions of themselves to limit who they can become. They believe that because they struggled before, they will struggle again. They believe that because they fell once, they are destined to fall always. They believe that their past is a mirror of their future. And this belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The 2% break away from their past. They understand that the past is a classroom, not a prison. They learn from it, but they do not live in it. They take lessons, not labels. They take wisdom, not wounds. They take strength, not shame. They understand that who they were yesterday does not dictate who they can become tomorrow. They refuse to let old stories shape their new destiny. They rise from their past instead of sinking into it. The 98% are often controlled by the opinions of others. They want approval. They seek validation. They fear criticism. They shape their choices based on what others think rather than what their soul knows. And because of this, they live someone else's life instead of their own. The 2% choose authenticity. They honor their inner truth more than outer voices. They understand that not everyone will understand them, accept them, or support them. And that is okay. The purpose of their life is not to be understood by the world, but to be aligned with what is right for them. The 98% fail because they stop too early. They give up when it gets difficult. They withdraw when they face setbacks. They quit when progress feels slow. They assume challenges mean they are not meant to succeed. But the 2% persist. They continue. They endure. They hold on to the vision even when the path becomes dark. They understand that breakthroughs happen after consistency, not before. They trust that every struggle is shaping them, strengthening them, preparing them. The 98% choose fear, distraction, comfort, comparison, and emotion. The 2% choose growth, clarity, resilience, intention, and commitment. One group surrenders to the world, the other rises above it. One group follows impulses, the other follows purpose. One group dreams, the other becomes.